Hello, I'm John Heintz. Welcome to a GIST Labs experiment in video. With me today is my friend and sometimes colleague, Matt Roberts.
Hello, I'm Matt Roberts. I am a Senior Director of Software Engineering with CA Technologies. I'm also an Agile at CA coach and help teams all over the world embrace Agile principles. And I spend a lot of my time in planning meetings.
Really? And what do you do in planning meetings, Matt?
We plan.
Then
we figure out what happens when we plan, and sometimes when things don't go according to plan.
Mm-hmm. Today, I think this is going to work out well. We're going to be talking about building blocks of planning, sequential versus collaborative planning models.
Cool.
So let's start with the sequential planning model.
Yep.
First, we want to do one thing, and second, we want to do something else. And of course, the second activity depends upon the first activity. We good so far?
Yeah, I think this is a common pattern. You see this quite often.
Yep. I would call this a finish and then start relationship. First, we finish the first activity, and then second, we can start the second activity.
Would you say that this is related to activities like, first I'm going to do some coding and then maybe go off and do some testing, or maybe first I do work on a back-end database persistence layer and then I do a UI layer?
Yep, any activity that you're going to kind of stage out, both of those are good examples. Handoffs from one group to another group would be another example. So those are all examples of what we might want to do first and second.
Great, I got it.
This works really well, except when it doesn't. Bugs and assumptions can come up and mean that we're not actually finished with the first activity.
Yeah, remember when I told you I was in those planning meetings a lot?
Yeah.
And reacting to the reality of the plans?
Yeah.
That happens quite a bit.
Those things?
Certainly.
They pop up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just sometimes. What do they result in?
Generally what happens is that it takes longer than you thought it was going to do the whole piece of work that would actually deliver customer value. It takes longer than you thought it would.
What about the shape of your plan? I would say that the shape of your plan means that you've got more work to do on the first, and you didn't actually get it finished when you thought you did.
Yeah, that's pretty common that there's more work. Sometimes we call that rework, and try to avoid rework as much as possible. But if you don't get the teams working together on it, then you can get all sorts of that kind of behavior.
Yeah. So rework is a future topic that we'll be talking about as well.
Okay, great.
Yep. So today, though, we want to talk about how the second activity still depends upon the first, and the more work for the first, the extra rework that we hadn't planned on. Instead of waiting for the first to finish and then starting the second, that doesn't actually apply anymore. Instead, the second depends upon the first activity really finishing, really being done. Done, as some would say.
Sure. Yeah, the way I see it is usually you've got QA people chasing developers around that have kind of finished with the first thing, and they're moving on to probably the third thing, and there's people in the group in the second group that are kind of trying to get people to focus, and they've already moved on, right?
Yeah, dev done. It works on my computer.
Absolutely.
I checked it in. Give me something else.
That's right.
Yep. So I would say that the actual relationship that we really need to pay attention to is a finish and then finish relationship. First, we can finish the first activity, and then we can finish the second activity. We can't actually finish the second activity until the first activity is finished, but we don't need to wait to start it. We actually didn't in this case. The other interesting detail on this is because the second activity really depends upon the rework anyway, we can take out the time delay and not even try to plan for that. We can just start working on the first activity and then start the second activity, and then we have to be bound by the finishing relationships between them. I would call this a collaborative planning model, that we build in a plan where we're going to collaborate together for a while. We start one, we start the other, then we finish the first, and then we can finish the second.
So I think I like this, but I'm a little bit nervous about multitasking and what happens in that situation. Are we just kind of context switching between lots of different things at the same time?
Multitasking is definitely a risk. Multitasking is primarily a risk when you're working on multiple tasks across different projects, is the biggest part of that risk. Here we're working on two activities that are driving towards the same goal, and we're working collaboratively on them, not necessarily multitasking on things that are unrelated.
When you say different projects, do you mean separate projects in terms of separate groups, or could you even mean separate user stories?
Separate user stories can be what we're talking about.
Okay.
Certainly separate projects across groups.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I would probably assume that both first and second are part of the same user story. If they depend upon each other and we can work on them together in a way, then they are part of the same unit of work. And when you're working in the same unit of work, you're not actually multitasking if you're collaborating.
Okay.
If we compare the collaborative and the sequential planning models together, the sequential planning model looks easier to plan and to manage, but when we add some of the reality to it, it actually gets more complicated. We've got 3 lines of dependencies instead of just 2 that we have to start keeping track of. And then further, if we look at the clock time for both of these, because we don't have to wait for one of them to finish before we can start the other, we end up with a clock time that shows us that collaborative planning models end up finishing sooner in terms of calendar time. We don't have as many built-in delays as the sequential planning does.
How do I plan for that?
How do you take advantage of that planning, or how do you build these into your plans?
How do I build these into my plans?
I would say that the easiest way is to have 2 teams or 2 individuals both scheduled to work on the first and the second at the same time. And then they can just simply collaborate together to figure out exactly how to go about doing that. Instead of trying to build a plan for who's going to hand off which API or which code to someone else, what I would do is I would just set those individuals or teams up so that they can simply work together and figure it out as they go. Instead of trying to plan and micromanage it, we just simply let the individuals work on it.
Is there a way to figure out the amount of time that it would take?
You're simply back to an estimation again, where things seem like they were harder or easier than other things. Agile story points and yesterday's weather are good ways to go about doing that. What this does is it doesn't give you better estimating, but it gives you a better way of dealing with surprises as they come up, because you've already got all the right people in the right place, and you can adjust more quickly to those things that become assumptions or bugs or surprises that would have derailed a sequential plan.
Okay. This seems to me like something I've seen years ago, and maybe still even to this day, the concept of sashimi. Have you heard of that?
No, sashimi, like slicing things thin?
Yeah, where you actually have overlapping, dev, QA, design, things like that. Kind of a model that I heard about a while ago, and something that we try to do to get these overlapping chunks.
I think that's probably a good visual metaphor for this. The sashimi would be multiple overlapping collaborative activities. Probably the most important thing is that the things that are being overlapped need to be related to the same unit of work. If they're just developers doing dev stuff near QA doing QA stuff, you're not going to get the same benefits. The sashimi needs to actually be the work that's first and second and third in that case.
Yeah, I like this idea.
This has been a GIST Labs experiment in video. I've had the pleasure of talking with my friend and colleague Matt, and we were talking about sequential versus collaborative planning models. I think that this is an important concept for a lot of teams, and I'm really glad that Matt was able to join me today. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks for the opportunity, John.
Thanks.